Show me your ticket, now!
A racist cop tried to humiliate a black man.
Show me your ticket now. The words cut through the glittering silence of the museum like a blade. Conversations faltered, champagne glasses froze mid-air, and every eye turned towards the back row. There sat Marcus Steele, a tall black man in a plain blazer over a hoodie, his hands resting calmly on his knees. He wasn't speaking. He wasn't causing trouble. He was simply there. But for Officer Vince, that stillness was more threatening than noise. The auction had barely begun. Spotlights bathed priceless paintings in golden light. The air buzzed with whispers of wealth and legacy. Senators, CEOs, and collectors had come to spend fortunes. Yet all it took was one barked command from a racist cop to shift the night from luxury to spectacle. "Stand up," Vince repeated, voice sharp, boots echoing against the marble floor. He was a man known not for keeping peace, but for performing power. To him, Marcus didn't fit. A black man in a hoodie at a gala? Suspicion. Guilt. Unwelcome. Marcus reached into his pocket, pulled out an embossed invitation, and held it up without a tremor. "I have a right to be here," he said, voice steady as stone. The words didn't calm Vince. They provoked him. Authority without obedience meant defiance. And Vince couldn't tolerate defiance. Around them, unease spread like ripples in water. Phones tilted upward. Tiny red lights blinked. Cameras began capturing what many pretended not to see. One man singled out, humiliated in public, not for what he had done, but for what he was. The auctioneer hesitated at the microphone, tapping it nervously. "Ladies and gentlemen," but his voice drowned beneath the weight of Vince's glare. The chandelier hummed overhead. A gavel struck wood in a dry rehearsal tap, like a drumbeat warning something bigger was coming. Marcus remained seated, his back straight, eyes unflinching. Silence can be a shield, and his was ironclad. But silence can also be gasoline waiting for a spark. Vince leaned closer, close enough that Marcus could smell the sharp mint on his breath. "Men like you don't belong here," he whispered. That whisper was louder than a shout. The crowd stiffened. Ethan, a young boy seated near the aisle, tugged his mother's sleeve. "Mom, why's the policeman angry at him?" His mother pressed a finger to her lips, eyes wide with fear. This was no longer an art auction. It was a test of belonging, a clash between prejudice and dignity. And though no one knew it yet, tonight would not be remembered for the paintings sold, but for the moment a racist cop tried to humiliate a black man and lit the fuse of his own downfall. The story begins here. The museum was built to inspire reverence, not conflict. Yet tonight, its polished marble floors and glittering chandeliers seemed to tremble under an invisible pressure. Wealth whispered in every corner. Silver trays drifted through the air, champagne bubbled in flutes. Patrons in tailored suits and silk gowns murmured about investments, legacies, and politics. But beneath the surface elegance, tension rippled like a current waiting for lightning. In the back row, Marcus Steele sat steady as stone. He wasn't bidding, wasn't networking, wasn't chasing recognition. He was here for the art. After years in uniform, after carrying scars from wars both abroad and at home, Marcus had learned to treasure stillness. Tonight, all he wanted was the quiet honesty of a canvas. A black man seeking peace in a room devoted to beauty. But peace was the very thing Officer Vince couldn't abide. Vince was built on suspicion, carved from arrogance. To him, silence wasn't serenity. It was defiance. And defiance was guilt. His boots clicked against marble like a metronome of menace as he advanced through the aisle, scanning the crowd as if hunting prey. 2 officers lingered by the entrance, Miller and Grant, their uniforms crisp, their faces uneasy. They had worked alongside Vince long enough to know his tendencies. He liked to be seen. He liked to show the badge not as a symbol of service, but as a stage prop of dominance. Tonight's audience couldn't be better. Senators, billionaires, collectors, critics, all the people whose opinions could bury or elevate a career. The auctioneer cleared his throat, tapping the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, if we could settle—" His words crumbled under the weight of eyes shifting toward the back. Murmurs sprouted. A nervous laugh here, a cough there. No one wanted to be part of the scene, but no one could look away. From the corner, innocence interrupted. Ethan, no more than 10 years old, tugged at his mother's sleeve. "Mom, why is the policeman angry at him?" His mother, Mrs. Carter, pressed a finger to her lips. Her silence wasn't lack of answer. It was fear that the answer might be heard. Marcus remained composed, shoulders square, eyes forward. He could feel the shift in the room, judgment gathering like a storm, ready to pour. He had endured this before, on sidewalks, at restaurants, during traffic stops, moments where being a black man meant being a suspect. But never had the stage been so grand, the audience so elite. Vince closed the distance, looming over Marcus with a smirk stretched thin across his face. "Ticket in hand doesn't change what I see," he muttered, low enough for the nearby row to hear. His voice dripped with contempt, designed to humiliate. Phones tilted upward. Cameras blinked awake. 1,000 tiny red eyes captured the standoff, each one a witness Vince chose to ignore. He believed the badge made him untouchable. But Marcus knew better. Cameras turned silence into evidence, and arrogance into downfall. The gavel tapped wood, a hollow warning. The chandelier swayed slightly, scattering fractured rainbows over frozen faces. Miller and Grant exchanged glances again, uneasy, but neither moved. To interfere was to break rank. To watch was safer. Marcus finally spoke, his voice steady, his words simple. "I'm here for the art, that's all." The line cut through the air, quiet yet undeniable. It wasn't an explanation. It was a declaration of belonging, of dignity. Vince's lip curled. "Art?" he sneered. "Men like you don't come here for art." He leaned in closer, whisper sharp enough to slice. "You come here to remind people why we need police." The cruelty in his tone silenced even the whispers. A collective discomfort spread, patrons shifting in their seats, unwilling to be complicit but too afraid to intervene. Marcus's eyes held steady. He would not rise. Not yet. To rise too soon would feed Vince's narrative. To stay seated was resistance in its quietest, most powerful form. And so the stage was set, not for a painting sale, but for a confrontation that would eclipse every masterpiece on the walls. Justice, prejudice, and power had taken their places. The auction hadn't even begun, and already history was waiting to be written. The air in the gallery thinned, as if oxygen itself was waiting to see who would move first. Marcus Steele sat unmoving, a calm monument in a hall designed for display. But calm was not the performance Vince wanted. He wanted submission. He wanted the room to watch a black man bend beneath his command. "Stand up!" Vince barked louder, enough to rattle the chandeliers. A glass slipped from someone's hand. shattering into a bright spray across the marble. Every head turned. The auctioneer froze at the podium, gavel in midair, his smile collapsing into silence. Marcus looked up, his eyes steady, his voice measured. "I told you, I have a right to be here." The words carried no tremor, but their calm was a slap across Vince's authority. Anger flared, red creeping up his neck. "Don't play with me," he hissed, yanking his baton free from its holster. "You think that ticket makes you untouchable?" A ripple of shock surged through the crowd. The gala of wealth and refinement had just transformed into a stage for violence. People gasped, hands flew to mouths, but no one stepped forward. Instead, more phones tilted up, cameras blinking like a constellation of judgment. Vince swung. The baton cut the air in a vicious arc aimed squarely at Marcus's shoulder. The sound cracked through the hall, a blunt thud against flesh. The room erupted in gasps. Ethan clutched his mother's arm, eyes wide with terror. Marcus exhaled, body rocking with the blow, but he did not rise immediately. Instead, he placed a steady hand on the armrest, pushed himself upright with deliberate slowness, and towered over Vince. The calm was gone from his face now. What replaced it was something colder, sharper, a storm-given form. "You just made a mistake," Marcus said. His voice was low, but it carried, sinking into the bones of everyone listening. Vince sneered, mistaking the words for weakness. "Oh yeah? What are you gonna do about it?" He shoved his face close, smirk dripping with contempt. Marcus didn't answer. His silence said more than words could. He reached out, and when Vince raised the baton again, Marcus's hand shot forward with startling speed, catching the weapon mid-swing. Gasps rose like a wave. The strength in Marcus's grip bent the metal, a groan of strain echoing in the hush. With a flick, he tossed it aside. The baton clattered against the marble, useless. The audience erupted, not in panic, but in cheers. "That's right," someone shouted. Others followed, voices rising in support. For the first time, the tide had turned. The crowd wasn't siding with the badge. They were siding with the man who had just refused to be broken. Vince's smirk faltered, but arrogance blinded him. "You think this changes anything?" he growled, lunging forward, fists clenched. Marcus sidestepped, fluid as a dancer, letting Vince's weight carry him into empty space. Then, with a calculated move, Marcus caught the officer by the arm, pivoted, and sent him crashing onto the marble floor. The impact rang like a drumbeat of justice. Vince sprawled, his breath knocked out, scrambling to recover. The hall exploded with sound. Cheers, shouts, applause. Patrons who minutes ago whispered about art were now shouting for accountability. Miller and Grant exchanged horrified looks near the door, frozen between loyalty to their partner and fear of what the cameras had just captured. Vince staggered back to his feet, face twisted with rage and humiliation. His uniform, once a symbol of order, now looked like a costume of failure. He roared, "You're resisting arrest!" His voice cracked with desperation, not authority. Marcus's reply cut through the noise. "I'm resisting nothing. I'm standing where I have every right to stand." The words landed heavier than any blow. They weren't just for Vince. They were for everyone in the room, for everyone watching through a lens. Phones continued to record. The red lights of dozens of cameras glowed like tiny torches, preserving every second. The crowd sensed it. History was being etched in pixels and memory. And in that moment, the balance of power shifted. The confrontation wasn't about a baton or a seat anymore. It was about a system exposed under chandelier light. The gala had become a courtroom, and the verdict was already forming. The crash of Vince's body against the marble floor still echoed in the vaulted ceiling when silence fell like a curtain. For a heartbeat, the entire museum seemed frozen in disbelief. Then came the ripple. Gasps, shouts, fragments of applause tangled with fear. The auction had dissolved into chaos, and at the center stood Marcus Steele, his chest rising slowly, his eyes fixed not on triumph, but on restraint. Vince writhed on the ground, face flushed crimson, humiliation burning deeper than the bruise on his ribs. He pushed himself upright, wheezing, spitting venom. "You'll regret this," he snarled, his voice hoarse. His hands trembled, not from weakness but from rage. But Marcus didn't answer. He didn't need to. His silence spoke volumes, an indictment louder than threats. Yet inside, beneath the stoic surface, his heart pounded. He had endured blows before, on foreign soil, in alleys back home. But this was different. This was a strike in front of witnesses, in front of power. It wasn't just an attack on him. It was an attack on dignity itself. The crowd shifted uneasily. Some whispered that Marcus should have walked away. Others muttered that Vince had crossed a line long before Marcus moved. The divide was visible, those who clung to order at any cost, and those who longed for justice in a room where justice had been missing. Ethan, the young boy, pressed closer to his mother. "Mom, is he in trouble?" The innocence in his question sliced deeper than Vince's baton ever could. Mrs. Carter pulled him close, her eyes glassy, torn between shielding her son and letting him see the truth. Sometimes the world punished the wrong people. Marcus's gaze swept across the hall. He saw fear, confusion, pity, admiration. He saw the weight of history pressing down, reminding him of every sidewalk stop, every suspicious glance, every whispered assumption that being a black man was cause enough for suspicion. Tonight those ghosts weren't hiding in shadows. They were on display under chandelier light. Vince staggered to his feet again, fury distorting his features. His uniform, once crisp and commanding, now clung wrinkled and sweaty, a costume unraveling under the spotlight. "Resisting arrest," he spat, grasping for authority as if words alone could rebuild the power slipping from his hands. But the crowd no longer believed him. Phones hovered higher, the blinking red of dozens of cameras capturing his desperation, his unraveling. Some patrons even began to jeer, their polished civility collapsing into raw outrage. The auctioneer, pale and trembling, leaned towards the microphone but said nothing. His voice was gone. No painting, no bid could matter in the shadow of what was unfolding. Marcus finally broke his silence. "You struck me for sitting. You called me guilty for breathing." His words were calm, but they carried a tremor of fury barely restrained. "This isn't about me. This is about you." Every syllable pierced the hush. Vince faltered, eyes darting as if searching for support. But Miller and Grant remained statues near the door. Their loyalty cracked under the weight of evidence. They knew. One move, one word, and the red lights would seal their complicity forever. The room's mood sank lower, heavy as lead. What should have been a night of art had become a tribunal of conscience. People weren't admiring brushstrokes anymore. They were confronting ugliness raw and unframed. And in that confrontation, Marcus bore the burden of centuries. Inside, his memories surged. The times he'd been asked to step aside in stores, the nights patrol cars followed him for blocks, the looks that said "less than" without a word. each wound reopened under Vince's glare. Each scar whispered that nothing had changed, and yet something had. Tonight he wasn't alone. Witnesses surrounded him, and truth was being carved into digital stone. Vince could sneer, could shout, could flail, but the moment had escaped his control. The chandelier above flickered. The gavel, abandoned, lay crooked on the podium. The museum's elegance had collapsed into a theater of reckoning. Marcus stood tall, but not triumphant. This was not victory. This was exposure, raw, heavy, dangerous. And as the air pressed down on everyone present, one question lingered like smoke. If this is how power behaves in the open, what horrors happen when the cameras are gone? The hall had reached its lowest point, the weight of injustice pressing every chest. And it was from this depth, this suffocating silence, that the next spark would rise. The museum had become a theater of judgment, its velvet seats transformed into witness stands. Vince's threats hung in the air, his badge dimming under the relentless glow of cameras. But as Marcus Steele stood tall, something stirred inside him. Old shadows returning, memories stitched into scars. He wasn't just fighting Vince. He was fighting every echo of injustice that had stalked him long before tonight. In the silence between shouts, Marcus's mind slipped backward. He was 16 again, standing outside a convenience store, hands pressed against the hood of a squad car while an officer rifled through his backpack. He had done nothing. His crime was existing in the wrong skin in the wrong neighborhood. The sting of cold metal cuffs bit into his wrists, the humiliation sharper than the pain. He remembered the looks. Neighbors staring, shaking their heads, some pitying, some assuming guilt. That night, he swore he would rise above it. But no vow could erase the mark. Another memory bled in. Years later, in uniform. Not the hoodie, not the blazer, but combat fatigues. Marcus overseas, carrying a rifle heavier than his fear, serving a nation that sometimes refused to serve him back. He remembered shielding his unit under fire, dragging a wounded friend to safety. He remembered the medal pinned to his chest, the hollow applause, and then the return home, where a store clerk still shadowed his steps down every aisle. The scars weren't only on his body. They were in the pauses people made when he entered a room, in the locks clicked when he walked by. Tonight, Vince wasn't the first to doubt his belonging. He was just the loudest. Back in the present, Marcus clenched his fists, not in rage but in resolve. He had carried injustice long enough. Tonight, the weight would shift. A small voice snapped him out of memory. Ethan, the boy in the aisle, tugged again at his mother's sleeve. "Mom, is he a bad guy? Or a hero?" The question was soft, but it struck the hall like thunder. Mrs. Carter bent low, whispering, but the microphones didn't catch her words. What mattered was Ethan's eyes, wide, searching, desperate for an answer the world still struggled to give. Marcus looked at the boy, and for the first time that night, his expression softened. He saw himself at that age, confused, angry, yearning for someone to show that dignity could stand taller than prejudice. The crowd noticed, too. Phones angled, recording not just the standoff, but the unspoken bond forming in that moment. A child asking the question, a man silently carrying the answer. Vince, still seething, barked louder. "Don't listen to him! He's nothing but a thug pretending to belong!" His voice cracked under strain, but the venom was clear. He wanted to turn Marcus into a villain, to paint him as the intruder in a room filled with marble and masterpieces. But Ethan's gaze lingered on Marcus, not Vince. And in that gaze, the story shifted. The black man in the blazer was no longer just a target. He was a symbol. Mrs. Carter finally spoke aloud, her voice trembling but strong enough for those near to hear. "No, Ethan. He's standing up for himself. And for all of us." The words caught like fire. A murmur swept the hall, sympathy blooming where silence had lived. Some nodded, some clapped softly. The tide was changing, not in Marcus's favor alone, but in the name of justice itself. Marcus inhaled deeply, the weight of the flashbacks and the present merging. This wasn't about him proving his worth to Vince. This was about showing every witness, every child, every lens that dignity was not negotiable. He straightened his shoulders, eyes locked on Vince. His silence no longer looked like submission. It looked like strength sharpened by memory, steadied by a boy's question, and carried by the voices now murmuring his defense. The subplot had become clear. Ethan wasn't just a spectator. He was the future, the proof that what happened tonight would echo beyond these marble walls. And for Marcus, the decision crystallized. He would no longer carry injustice quietly. He would make tonight the night it cracked open, under chandeliers and cameras, for all to see. The murmurs in the museum had changed tone. What had begun as whispers of doubt now swelled into a low hum of sympathy, even admiration. Ethan's question still hung in the air, fragile but unshakable. Is he a hero? And Marcus Steele felt the weight of that answer pressing against his chest. He could no longer stand in silence, waiting for Vince to write the story. Tonight, the story would be his. Marcus straightened his back, taller than the marble statues lining the gallery. His blazer hung loose from the scuffle, his hoodie collar torn at the seam, but none of it diminished the authority radiating from him. It wasn't authority granted by a badge. It was born of scars, memory, and the refusal to bow. He spoke, voice calm yet resonant. Enough. The single word rippled through the hall. People froze, listening. Even Vince stuttered in his next insult, startled by the finality in Marcus's tone. "I am not leaving," Marcus continued, steady gaze sweeping the room. "I bought my ticket. I walked in these doors like everyone else, and I will not move because one man has decided I don't belong." His words were not shouted, but they carried the weight of stone dropped into water. Each sentence sent ripples across the hall, reaching every corner, every witness. The energy shifted. Patrons who moments ago hid behind programs and glasses of champagne now lifted their heads, some even nodding. Vince laughed bitterly, but it rang hollow. "You think anyone cares what you say? I make the rules here." Marcus didn't flinch. "You enforce the law, but tonight you broke it." Gasps scattered the room. Someone whispered, "He's right." Another voice answered, "It's on video." The cameras rose higher. Dozens of red lights blinked like embers, each one recording not only Vince's downfall but Marcus's stand. Vince stepped forward, finger jabbing into Marcus's chest. "Sit down before I put you down!" Marcus caught his wrist mid-motion. He didn't squeeze, didn't strike, just held it firmly, unmoving, unshakable. His voice dropped lower, cold enough to freeze the room. "You don't put me down. Not here. Not ever again." The crowd erupted, not in fear, but in cheers. Applause, shouts of approval, voices crying out, "That's right! Stand strong!" The museum was no longer an auction. It was an arena, and Marcus had claimed the ground. Vince yanked his arm free, face twisted in humiliation. He turned, gesturing wildly at Miller and Grant. "Arrest him, now!" The two officers froze. Their eyes darted to Marcus, to Vince, to the sea of raised phones. Miller shook his head almost imperceptibly. Grant's hands hovered near his cuffs, but he didn't move. The risk was too great. They could see the tide turning, and they weren't about to drown with Vince. Marcus's chest heaved, but not from exhaustion. It was resolve. His voice thundered now, rising above the chaos. This is not about one man. This is about all of us. About every person who's ever been told they don't belong. About every time justice bent to arrogance instead of truth. The chandelier above glittered, as if amplifying his words. The walls themselves seemed to absorb them, ready to echo long after the crowd left. Vince lunged again, fists raised. But Marcus didn't back away. He moved forward, each step deliberate, each step eroding Vince's illusion of control. "You want fear," Marcus said, closing the space between them. "But fear is done. Tonight you face truth." His voice cracked like thunder. The crowd roared, united. Vince faltered, retreating a step for the first time. And in that retreat, the shift was complete. Marcus wasn't the accused anymore. He was the challenger, the defender, the man who stood not only for himself, but for the boy watching, for the mother trembling, for the hundreds of witnesses recording history through their lenses. Resolve had hardened into action. The next blow would not be physical. It would be the unraveling of Vince's career, his arrogance, his illusion of power. Marcus had set the stage. Now the reckoning would follow. The museum was no longer quiet. It pulsed like a living heart. Every beat echoed in voices, shouts, and the unrelenting hum of cameras recording. The velvet seats had turned into bleachers, and the art on the walls faded into irrelevance. All that mattered was the confrontation between Marcus Steele and Officer Vince. Vince's face was a mask of fury, his career, his authority, his pride, crumbling under the weight of one man's refusal to kneel, and in his desperation he doubled down. He lunged again, fists swinging wildly, as though raw force could reclaim what arrogance had lost. But Marcus was no stranger to chaos. His body moved with the precision of training, the patience of someone who had survived wars. He sidestepped the blow, caught Vince's arm, and twisted just enough to send the officer sprawling once more, this time face first into the polished marble. The sound drew a collective gasp, followed by cheers erupting like thunder. Phones zoomed in, flashes blinked. "He dropped him again!" someone shouted. Another voice cried out, "It's over for that cop!" Vince scrambled up, humiliated beyond repair. His hands bled from the marble, his uniform torn. Yet still, blinded by rage, he screamed, "He's attacking an officer! Arrest him!" All eyes turned to Miller and Grant, the two officers by the door. For the first time they stepped forward, but not toward Marcus. They walked toward Vince. Their hesitation was visible, their discomfort raw. The crowd sensed it, murmurs swelling. "They know the truth." "Vince," Miller said quietly, voice cutting through the noise. "Stop. Everyone is watching." The words sliced deeper than any of Marcus's moves. Vince froze, disbelief flickering across his face. His allies, the very men sworn to back him, had cracked under the pressure of truth. Marcus stood, unflinching, his broad frame casting a shadow over the broken officer. His voice carried not anger, but finality. "This ends now." The hall erupted again, half with applause, half with stunned silence. Vince looked around, searching for rescue, but found only phones, only witnesses, only the crushing realization that his power had evaporated. And in that moment he understood. He was already finished. But Marcus knew the night wasn't over. Justice had not yet been sealed. The crowd might cheer, the cameras might record, But authority was still in Vince's hand until someone higher intervened. And so the air thickened with anticipation. Everyone waited for the final reckoning. The museum had never felt so alive, or so heavy. Applause clashed with gasps. The roar of approval tangled with the hiss of disbelief. Vince, sweat-soaked and trembling, stood cornered under the chandeliers, his badge catching the light like a lie. His eyes darted, wild, desperate for authority to shield him, and then authority arrived. The grand doors swung open with a thunderclap against the marble. Captain Harris, broad-shouldered in his dark uniform, marched into the hall with the weight of command. His presence silenced the crowd in an instant. Even the cameras seemed to steady, lenses locking onto the man who could end this spectacle with a single order. "Vince!" His voice rolled like a verdict. Calm, controlled, absolute. "Step away." Vince staggered forward, clinging to his last weapon, his voice. "Captain, he attacked me. He resisted arrest in front of everyone." Harris cut him off with a raised hand. "Enough." The word cracked sharper than a gavel. He turned to the crowd, scanning the rows of raised phones, the blinking red lights. "I see what everyone else sees, and I will not allow this department to be disgraced further." The room erupted in murmurs of shock. Vince's face drained of color. You can't do this to me," he stammered. Harris's stare did not waver. "You disgraced yourself." He stepped closer, eyes never leaving Vince. "Remove your badge. Hand over your weapon." The words hung like a sentence. The audience held its breath. Dozens of lenses zoomed in, eager to record the precise moment power changed hands. Vince shook his head violently. "I won't. Now." Harris's command thundered through the hall. Defiance drained into fear. Vince's trembling fingers reached for the badge, tugging it from his chest. The metallic pin slipped from his hand, clinking against the marble, a sound that echoed like the fall of a gavel. His gun followed, laid on the floor with reluctant fingers. The crowd erupted. Applause thundered. Cheers shook the chandeliers. The once silent museum now roared with the sound of vindication. Marcus didn't smile. He didn't revel. He simply stood, shoulders squared, absorbing the moment with the gravity it demanded. Harris turned to him, his tone shifting to respect. "Mr. Steele, are you unharmed?" Marcus nodded once. "I'll live." His voice was steady, but his eyes burned, not with pain, but with resolve. He looked at the crowd, at the forest of raised phones, at the boy whose question had changed the air in the room. He raised his voice, so it carried to every corner. "This isn't about me. It never was. Tonight, a racist cop tried to strip me of dignity in front of you all, and if it can happen to me, it can happen to anyone. Justice cannot be selective. Justice belongs to everyone." The applause surged again, louder than before. Ethan's eyes glowed with awe. Mrs. Carter held her son tightly, whispering, "Remember this night." Marcus stepped forward, kneeling briefly so he was eye level with the boy. He signed the small notepad Ethan clutched, writing his name with a firm hand. "You belong everywhere your courage takes you," he whispered. The boy smiled, the kind of smile that outlives a night, a year, maybe even a lifetime. Marcus rose, his shadow long in the chandelier light. He looked once more at Vince, now cuffed by Miller and Grant, dragged toward the door, his protests drowned beneath the crowd's cheers. The hall belonged to a different kind of authority now. Not a badge, not a baton, but truth. And as Marcus walked down the aisle, the crowd parted like waves. Applause followed him, echoing beneath the vaulted ceiling. He paused at the doors, turning back to face the cameras one last time. "If you've ever been told you don't belong, Know this, you do. Stand where you are meant to stand, and never let anyone take that from you. The screen of every phone captured his words, his image framed in the golden light. Then he stepped into the night, leaving the museum buzzing with history in the making. The story of the paintings would fade, but the story of the man who stood would live far longer.